This week's parsha is Parshas Miketz. In Parshas Miketz we have more dreams. Last week we talked about Yosef's dreams. This week we are going to talk about Pharaoh's dreams. Now, in a sense, the fact that the Torah tells us about Yosef's dreams and two dreams and all the details, I mean, we did start off last week asking why it's so important to have all of those details, etc. But at the end of the day, it was part of Yosef's life. It was part of Yosef's story. This week, the dreams are Pharaoh's dreams. Yosef is a lot more important to us than Pharaoh is. Pharaoh is important to the extent that he is a central and very influential person in the story and in the development of the movement of the Jewish people, of Yaakov and his family towards Egypt, etc. But to be perfectly frank, maybe it doesn't sound, so PC, even though I think the world's starting to become a little bit less religious about that. But let's be frank. We don't really care about the minutiae of Pharaoh's life as much as we care about the minutiae of Yosef's life. Just let's be real, right? So, hearing about Yosef's dreams and the details, okay. But Pharaoh? Why do we need to know about Pharaoh, about how many dreams he had and all the specific details of the dreams, etc.? Now, the dreams are important to a degree because that was how Yosef became the viceroy, because Yosef was in prison where we finished up last week's parsha with Pharaoh's butler and baker, and they both had dreams, and then Yosef came and he was like, hey, what's up? You guys look kind of not so good today, not so happy, and they told him about the dreams, and he interpreted the dreams, and the baker was killed as Yosef interpreted, and the butler came back to his job as Yosef interpreted. And then 2 years later, which is where we open up this week, Pharaoh has these two dreams, and is trying to figure out what do these dreams mean. He's sure there's some sort of message, but he can't figure it out. All the people who come up with interpretations, none of them are landing for him. And then the butler says, oh, hang on a second. Remember when I was in prison 2 years ago, there was this guy there, Yosef, and he interpreted our dreams properly. So maybe go get him. And then they did, and they brought Yosef to interpret the dreams. And then Pharaoh said, Yosef interpreted the dreams. Then he gave Pharaoh advice about how to move forward and to make the most of the heads up and the message that he got in the dreams. And then Pharaoh says, oh, wow, look at you. What a great plan. Who better to implement it than you? And then Yosef becomes the leader of Egypt. The dreams are relevant. They're an important part of this whole process, clearly. But the amount of detail that we have, first of all, Hashem didn't have to be this creative in terms of finding a way for Yosef to come out and to become viceroy, but yeah, as you'd say in Yiddish, whatever, he did. But the amount of detail we have in the dreams, the Torah telling us about Pharaoh's dreams, there's going to be something more than just the relevance, the fact that they play a role in the story. Because the fact that they play a role in the story, they could have been mentioned without going that much into detail. And if the Torah is going that much into detail about something that was a part of Pharaoh's life, there has to be some message here that would warrant the Torah doing that. And the truth is that the answer to this, the reason why, the message has a lot to do with the dreams that Yosef had last week. Or in last week's parsha. He had the dreams a long time ago. But Yosef went on to become the ruler of Egypt. He also was what we would call the Nasi Hader. He was the preeminent leader of the Jewish people throughout the time in Egypt until he passed away. And dreams were a thing that clearly Yosef was a dreamer. Yosef had these dreams. These dreams were a very prominent part of his life. So Yosef clearly had some sort of, let's say, special connection to dreams. He had a relationship with dreams. He had these dreams. They were very a very real and substantial and prominent part of his life. So now, when Hashem is planning to figure out, obviously figuratively, Hashem doesn't have to figure things out. The source of everything is from Hashem. Figuring out implies that there's a situation that we need to resolve. Hashem doesn't need to resolve a situation. Hashem is the origin of the situation. But when Hashem is deciding, or however we want to say it, how he's going to work this out and make it happen, this thing of Pharaoh and then Yosef coming out and Yosef becoming the ruler, there are many ways to do that. Many ways to make that happen. I mean, ultimately, in reality, there were infinite possibilities of ways that Hashem could have gone about making this happen. But Hashem made it happen with dreams, specifically because Yosef was a dreamer. Yosef had a relationship with dreams. Dreams were something that clearly Yosef's soul had some connection to. And so Hashem programmed or architected Pharaoh's role in this story to match or to suit Yosef's soul and Yosef's journey. So because Yosef's journey in this world involved dreams, his soul clearly had a relationship with dreams. So Hashem made this whole thing play out through Pharaoh having dreams, and that was all engineered in order to suit Yosef. This isn't just a one-off thing, this approach. The fact that Hashem engineered something to suit Yosef and his journey in the world. This is really just an archetypal example of everything. When things come up in our lives that are difficult, that are challenging, things that maybe, I could tell you an example, just a very real example, something that I struggled with a long time ago, and it was really difficult. I used to, when I was younger, I still have a very deep appreciation for music. And when I was younger, there was a stage in my life when I listened very much to the kind of music that you hear from cars driving around Brooklyn with their windows open in the summertime. Let's just say it's not Avram Fried or Mordechai Ben David. And there was a point in my time when I decided, I'm not listening to that anymore. I'm listening to Jewish music, but I had a very, very deep connection and relationship with that music. And stopping to listen to it in Australia wasn't such a big deal. It wasn't so hard. But when I came here, and every time I walked down the street, and I came here in the summertime, every time I was walking down the street, a car would drive by within a matter of a minute, tops, with windows down, blasting a song that I really liked and had been listening to not so long ago. It was very, very, very difficult for me. And basically I had two options. One of them was either I was going to be moving along to the music, or I had to run. And I did. It was being stuck at a red light next to a car playing music was extremely difficult for me. Now, what we're learning from the story with Pharaoh here is that what it seems at face value is, oh boy, there's a car playing this music. I happen to walk past the car just as it's here. This is really difficult. Really what happened is the reverse. I am here. Hashem wants to really push me through this challenge. Hashem wants me to really face this challenge head on. And so he made a car pull up playing exactly that song with the windows down and to stop at the intersection just as I was also stuck at the intersection. And that whole thing happened just for me. Maybe the person was listening to the radio and the DJ in the radio station put that song on just then, literally just for me. Because that was something Hashem wanted for me in that moment. And this is true of every challenge when there are things that show up. Especially when it's this kind of thing that is just a challenge that comes from temptation or, momentary pleasure, those sorts of things especially, those show up when they're supposed to show up for the sake of our journey and our progress. And Hashem engineers all of that because this is what he wants for us. The same way that Pharaoh, this whole thing happened with Pharaoh. There's many ways that this could have played out, but no, Hashem made it play out with Pharaoh having dreams because that suited Yosef and his soul and his journey. Now, on one hand, it doesn't really change anything, but at the same time, it changes everything. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't change any circumstances, let's say, right? When we find ourselves in a difficult situation, facing something that's very challenging, the challenging circumstances are what they are. And knowing this information doesn't change the circumstances of the challenge. But at the same time, they also can change everything, because let's say, for example, someone else who isn't into music or doesn't like that kind of music at all could have been standing in the same place right next to me, and it wouldn't have been a thing for them at all. They wouldn't have even noticed the song, maybe. Now, we both have in almost identical circumstances in the moment, but our perspective and what those circumstances mean to us is completely different, and so our experience is completely different. So not sometimes. Our perspective, our perception is the most influential factor in determining, and I'm going to broaden this out a little, determining our quality of life in general. It sounds like an extreme thing to say, but it really is true. Right? There are some people who can get punched in the face and they'll just be like, and smile. I know a couple of people like that who are just so deeply, perpetually happy that nothing will wipe the smile off their face. And then you have someone on the other extreme who can win a $500 million lottery and find a reason to kvetch about it and to complain and to be miserable. If I give you two options, and this is all the information you have, option number one, get punched in the face. Option number two, win $500 million lottery. Which option are you going to choose? I think everyone's going to choose the lottery, right? Except for the masochist, maybe. Now, if I were to broaden this out and give you some more context and make things a little bit more complex, you can be a person who just got punched in the face and is still happy, or you can be a person who just won a $500 million lottery and is still miserable, and maybe even more miserable than before. Which one of those situations would you choose to be in?
Not this one.
Neither. Okay.
Like in the...
It's like a multiple choice test. See none of the above. Fair response. Right? The person who... Why is it that if I would say, would you want to be punched in the face, the answer is generally going to be no, because when you get punched in the face, it doesn't feel good afterwards. The issue is not the being punched in the face. The reason we don't want to be punched in the face is because the experience that results from it, technically, it's not the punch, it's the experience that results from the punch. If someone would say, would you like to win a $500 million lottery today? Most people are going to say, yeah. Why? Not because of winning the lottery, because of the experience that results from winning the lottery. So if someone has, now the experience really, I'm not saying that circumstances don't contribute to our experience. Obviously they do. But these two extreme examples illustrate how, while our circumstances contribute towards our experience, the thing that determines what contribution the circumstances are going to make is our perception. It's our perspective. If someone just sees everything in a positive light, then everything is going to make a positive contribution towards their experience. If someone sees everything in a negative light, then everything is going to have a negative impact on their experience, because our experience our experience is, let's say, a result or a product of, let's say, everything that comes into our experience, everything that enters in and becomes a part of our experience, then the quality of that experience is determined by all of those things. Our circumstances have to pass through and be filtered by our perception and our perspective before they reach our experience. So our perception and our perspective is the thing that actually decides what's going to enter into our experience as a result of these circumstances. Now, we can work on improving circumstances, and very often it's a good thing to do, but when we work on strengthening and elevating and improving our perception, our perspective, the benefit of that is 24/7, because if we increase our perspective, let's say if we can make our perspective 1% more positive, that means our experience 24/7 is 1% more positive the whole time. When good things happen, they're going to be even 1% more positive than the contribution it makes on our experience will be 1% more positive than it was before. When bad things happen, the contribution they make on our experience will be 1% more positive than before. That's 24/7, 1% more positive. 2%, 3%, 4%, the impact is enormous. And it affects everything. It affects us all the time. No matter what happens, it's going to be better for us. The impact on our experience, on our quality of life is going to be better if we have a more positive perspective than it would have been if we had a less positive perspective. So perspective, in a sense, is everything. So when a person, let's say, is standing under lights, or a person is, I don't know, struggles with, maybe, I'll stick with this example because I don't know if other examples might bring things up for other people. I'd rather do it to myself. So let's say I'm standing at the corner and it's in the middle of summer and it's Crown Heights and a car pulls up right next to me and it's playing a song that, I have a deep connection with. And it's very naturally, my immediate reaction, what I'm going to feel, is naturally likely to be, "Are you serious? This is so difficult. This is so hard. Let me try to get away from this. Oh, there are cars coming. I can't cross the road. Now, another option, another way of looking at it is, oh, I'm here now. This is something I'm working on. This is a big deal for me and it takes a lot of effort. Every time I put in that effort, every little bit of progress that I make, I'm building the strength and the resilience. I'm overcoming a challenge, which means I'm bringing the infinity of Hashem into the world. I'm bringing Hashem, I'm deepening and strengthening the connection of my soul and my body to Hashem. I'm bringing Mashiach a step closer. Hashem custom designed this whole thing for me. If I think, the reason that this person left the house at exactly the right time to land up at this intersection just next to me, and the reason why, that CD happened to be in the stereo, or who even knows what CDs are anymore, or, that song happened to come up at this moment. Hashem engineered all of that just to give me this opportunity. Now, nothing, in terms of the circumstances, nothing has changed. I'm in the same place, same car, same music. But all of a sudden, my perspective is completely different. I'm looking at this, I understand that this is an opportunity. Hashem engineered all of this just for me. So think about how important this is. Think about how valuable it is. Think about the magnitude and value of this opportunity if Hashem engineered all of that just to give me this opportunity. Completely different. And it completely changes the slope of the playing field. Before, maybe it was a really steep uphill battle. Maybe now it's a less steep uphill battle. Maybe it's level. Maybe it's downhill. Maybe it's not so difficult at all anymore. Yeah, sometimes it just becomes substantially less difficult. And the thing to I think an important part of this to really get the full impact and the full benefit and value of this is to understand that this is not like some, some trick to make things less difficult for ourselves. It's actually the truth, right? In CBT, in cognitive behavioral therapy, I mean, it's also just in cognitive therapy, which is one of the parents of CBT. There's something, I mean, it's not limited to this, but it's something that's a very strong focus of it is something called cognitive distortions, right? Cognitive distortions means when we have a distorted way of perceiving something or thinking about something. And cognitive distortions can lead to a lot of misery. And sometimes when we just realize, hang on a second, is this even true? Or does this even make sense? And we just realize, hang on, that was a complete cognitive distortion. That didn't make any sense. I was all worked up about this thing, and as soon as we reframe it, that can change everything. Right? Not because we've convinced ourselves or tricked ourselves. It was a distortion. It was wrong. As long as we are in the cognitive distortion, the fact that it's wrong doesn't make it any less difficult or challenging or painful. Because if we are in that cognitive distortion, then that is our experience at that time. But the idea of learning to recognize cognitive distortions and then reframe is not a way of tricking ourselves out of being upset or having a hard time. It's a way of making us no longer be tricked into something negative for no reason because it wasn't even true in the first place. All we're doing is opening our eyes to the truth. And just by the way, this doesn't even have to be just for people who really struggle with things. Certainly for people who struggle with things, recognizing cognitive distortions can be very valuable. But I would say for anyone, if you're, oh, perfect, I was just going to say Nitunach, it's coming up. When we can't learn Torah on, where exactly are we up to? Monday 23rd, tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, after Shkia until midnight, we can't learn Torah. So, if we have nothing better to do, Google cognitive distortions. Learning to recognize these things and realizing, because my guess is that everybody is making their lives less positive than they could be to varying degrees as a result of cognitive distortions. Just becoming aware of the common cognitive distortions and realizing when we're doing them and making ourselves miserable or upset for no reason can be so empowering. And the thing about it that's so beautiful is, again, we're not tricking ourselves into positivity. It was a distortion in the first place. We're just freeing ourselves of a distortion that was making things worse unnecessarily. It wasn't even true. Right? So if we look at the word, the Hebrew word for olam, for world, in Hebrew is olam. Ayin lamed mem, he'elem, concealment, hidden. Now, the word olam, in Hebrew, every word, the difference between Hebrew, and by Hebrew I don't mean Ivrit, I mean Lashon HaKodesh, the sacred biblical Hebrew. There's a difference between this language, Lashon HaKodesh, and every other language, and that is that, in general, words are arbitrary. It doesn't make a difference, right? This is called a cup, this is a stapler, this is a pen. This didn't have to be called pen. If this was called stapler and this was called pen, and we were all on the same page about it, and everyone knew that this was called stapler and this was called pen, it would be equally fine. Right? We just have to have words in order to be able to refer to things, to articulate things, to describe things, to communicate. As long as we're all on the same page about what a word means, it doesn't make a difference what the word is. And what's the proof? There are lots of different languages that have lots of different words for the same thing and they all work. It happens to be, and this is something I didn't learn until recently, that English is the most effective language for articulating things, but that's because it has more words. English has apparently substantially more words than any other language, which gives us the ability to articulate things more specifically because we have more words available and each word is slightly different. which allows us to articulate things more specifically, more in detail. But it's not that any given word is more effective than this equivalent word in another language. It doesn't make a difference. This is not the case in Lashon HaKodesh. Lashon HaKodesh, the language, right? We know that Hashem spoke. Hashem brought the universe into being through speech. Hashem said, "Let there be light," and then there was light, etc. Right? Pirkei Avos says that Hashem brought the world into being through 10 utterances. Because the Hebrew word, for example, for light, which is Aleph Vav Resh, Or, that word and the letters that make up the word are vehicles that carry divine creative energy from Hashem, and this specific word carries a specific divine creative energy that is the source of the existence of light, of visible electromagnetic radiation. This word, Or, in Hebrew, is the vehicle that carries the divine creative force that brings it into existence. So words matter a whole lot. And so when we see words that have something in common, they have the same root word, for example, it's not just, oh wow, that's so cute, I can say that at the Shabbos table. This is a real thing. The world, the universe, is called Olam because of the fact that it is Helem, it is concealment. Concealment doesn't mean fake or non-existent. That's an illusion. Concealed means there is something that is covered up. Maybe there's something that we see and the truth of what it really is concealed. It's behind some sort of cover. Right now, Hashem, if we look at the account of creation of the world, Hashem created the world, it says, Bereshis bara Elokim. It doesn't say Yud Kei Vav Kei. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. Vayomer Elokim yihi or. Throughout the account of creation, Hashem is referred to as Elokim, not Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim are two different names for Hashem that refer to two different things. Yud Kei Vav Kei refers to the word Yud Kei Vav Kei, or the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, has all the letters that we need for Haya, which means was, Hoive is, and Yihiyeh will be. They're all the letters necessary are in this word. Why? Because this name Yud Kei Vav Kei refers to Hashem, as Hashem is the absolutely infinite source of everything, including space and including time. So within Hashem, within the, let's say, level, aspect, none of these words are right, but I don't know which one's the least wrong. The least not quite right is better than wrong. In the level or whatever it is of Hashem that is referred to with the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is the absolute infinite source of everything. So the past, the present, and the future are all in there together because that is absolute infinity. The past comes from there. The present comes from there. The future comes from there. So within Hashem, the past, present, and future they all just coexist as part of absolute infinity. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, that's great for Hashem. But if Hashem wants to have a world the way that we have it, where time plays out sequentially and there is a past that was and a present that is and a future that will be, and they're separate from each other, just having Yud Kei Vav Kei on blast isn't going to work because everything's just going to be infinite and jumbled together and all coexist within that infinity. So there is let's say, a filter of sorts that's applied, and this is what's referred to with the name Elokim. If you look at the name Elokim, I know we're all over the board today. And if you spell it properly with a hey, I'm not going to write it like that, but if this kuf was a hey, the numerical value of the name Elokim would be the same numerical value as the word hateva, the nature. because nature exists. And so this name of Elohim refers to Hashem as Hashem measures and calculates and restricts and limits. And all of that calculation and limitation and restriction is necessary in order to have a world that is the way that the world is, where there's a past and a present and a future, and every point in space is separate to each other point in space. Within Hashem, all of space just coexists within the absolute infinity. In order for things to be able to be separated out, the creation happens through a process that is primarily at face value. Hashem is creating through this, let's call it persona or whatever it is, it's referred to with the name Elohim, which limits, restricts, reduces. Everything's calculated and measured. And so when you read the account of creation of the world, it says Elohim, 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 Elohim. It doesn't say Yud Kei Vav Kei. That being said, if you read it and you count every time the name Elohim is used in a statement of creation, it's used 26 times. 26 is the numerical value of the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because Elohim isn't the source of existence. Yud Kei Vav Kei, this absolute infinity of Hashem is the source of existence. And Hashem applies that limitation of the name Elohim to that which comes from the absolute infinite source to create the world. So at face value, it shows up as Elohim. Vayomer Elohim, Bereshis bara Elohim. But there is this illusion A-L-L, it alludes to, not an illusion. It alludes to the fact that at the end of the day, behind that, everything's coming from Hashem, the absolute infinity of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, where everything is all just together in the absolute infinity. And that's alluded to with the fact that the name Elohim is mentioned in an act of creation 26 times. So two things are true at the same time. Everything comes from the absolute infinity of Hashem, but Hashem intentionally applies limitation, calculation, restriction, measurement, so that things are brought into being in a way that is very limited and mundane relative to the truest identity, which is the divine creative force that's making it exist at all times. So when we look around, for example, this is a tissue box, or this is a box that has tissues in it. True or false? True. This is a box that has tissues in it that is here right now because Hashem is actively making it exist with a divine creative force that's bringing it into being. True or false?
True.
Was the first statement less true?
Just less descriptive.
It was a less complete truth. Yeah?
Yeah.
It was true. There was nothing false about the first statement, but it was very incomplete. There was a lot of relevant information missing. So now, the fact that when we look at this, and if someone would ask you, what is this? Most of us are probably going to say, oh, it's a tissue box, or it's a box with tissues. Most people are going to say tissue box. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not an error or a shortcoming. The universe was brought into being that way by design. That's the way that it's supposed to. That is supposed to be our natural response. We then have a job to do, and a big part of that job is learning and integrating and internalizing so that slowly, bit by bit, when we look at that, we start to see a tissue box that exists with a purpose. A tissue box that's here for a reason. That's a tissue box that exists because Hashem is making it exist. That's a tissue box that exists because there's a divine creative force that's acting on it right now to make it exist, right? This is these stages of, let's say, realization or seeing things in this way is, years and years and years of work. But it's a very real possibility that a person can get to a point where they look around and they see purpose and divinity in everything. Figuratively, and physically see it with our eyes. That'll be when Mashiach comes. It says, V'ro kol basar yachdav kipi Hashem diber. When Mashiach comes, our eyes, our flesh, V'ro kol basar, our flesh will see, our physical eyes will see, kipi Hashem diber. They will see the speech of Hashem, the divine creative force in everything. We will look at things and see with our eyes the divine creative force that's making it exist. That is not something we can do now. But we can see it figuratively over time as we learn and we work and we learn and we work and we internalize and integrate, etc. The fact that calling that a tissue box is an incomplete truth doesn't mean it's not true. And more importantly, it's not like it's nobody's fault that if you ask someone, what is that? They don't say, that's a tissue box that's here for a reason because there is a divine creative force acting on it to make it exist because Hashem wants it to. Right? It's not like someone's a bad person if that's not their response. That being said, if we put in the work and we start to see things in that light, everything, it just becomes different. We look at people and we see figuratively a soul. We see a mission in the world, even if we don't know what the mission is, but we look at a person and we see a soul, a body with a soul inside that's here for a reason, and it's invaluable and it's a part of the infinity of the Creator. And naturally, where judgment doesn't happen, moral judgment doesn't happen, appreciation of the people around us and loving your fellow as yourself starts to just happen, right? And the reality of a person who sees things that way, everything about it completely changes. And it's not that they've tricked themselves into something. All they've done is, let's say, as the expression goes, they've lifted the veil, figuratively. And now, over time, through this work, they're seeing a more complete picture of things. What they saw before wasn't a lie, but it was the world, which is Helem, a concealment. It was brought into being through Elohim so that the full truth is behind the veil, and it's supposed to be. But the more we can figuratively lift the veil for ourselves by learning, understanding, internalizing, integrating, and it's work, we can lift the veil for ourselves, and that changes everything. So when someone, hears music that's difficult for them to not get caught up in, or smells the aroma of something that, is a challenge for them to not eat, or sees something that's really tempting and it's hard for them to not go and indulge, whatever it is, if we just see or hear or smell or feel that challenge and it's just like, this is really hard, it's really hard. If we can lift the veil for ourselves a little and be like, Hashem gave Pharaoh these dreams just to make it work for Yosef's soul and Yosef's journey. The whole reason that this happened with Pharaoh having these dreams, and the Torah tells us about all the details and the drama and one interpreter and another interpreter and no one could figure it out. All of that was done just to suit Yosef's soul and his journey. When a challenge shows up, when something comes up and it can be really difficult, if we can lift the veil, the helem, the concealment of the world, so as opposed to just seeing it at face value as a part of the world, we now see it as something that is here because Hashem made it be here, and Hashem engineered this, everything that contributed towards this circumstance, Hashem engineered all of that just to give me this opportunity to grow, to persevere, to be able to overcome. The whole thing looks completely different. It doesn't mean there won't be any challenge, but it does change the gradient of the playing field drastically. And, let's say it's maybe more of a social thing, because I think when it comes to things that involve other people, there's a whole added element of challenge that's just probably for most or all people adds a whole additional layer of challenge on top of just like smells and sounds, etc. When there is a social pressure to conform, to do something, to behave a certain way or to not behave a certain way, and this social pressure is being applied, pushing us in the wrong direction, in a direction that's not where we really need to go and not where we really deeply, truly want to go. As long as we have a olam, a worldly perspective, which is Helam, where a lot of the truth is behind the veil, the thing that we're going to feel is, oh, I really want to conform, but I really shouldn't, and there's this pressure to conform. If we can lift the veil and all of a sudden, this is not a force that I need to conform to. This is a force that was completely engineered by Hashem just to give me the opportunity not to conform. This is not something that I really kind of have to conform to, but I'm not allowed to. This is something that in truth doesn't even want me to conform. It's just here to pressure me, to give me this opportunity to achieve and to grow and to overcome. Now, while the circumstances haven't changed at all, if we can lift the veil and see the full truth, it can completely change how difficult this is for us. And so this is why the Torah tells us about these dreams, all the dreams. First of all, Hashem made it play out this way. The Torah tells us about all the details to let us know and to emphasize this fact that when something shows up to make things difficult, or something shows up that makes things difficult, remember that Hashem engineered this whole thing with Pari just to make it work for Yosef's soul and Yosef's journey. This thing that I'm struggling with now, this thing that's really, really pressuring me in a way that a part of me really doesn't want to go, and whatever that might be, whatever the case might be, this is just a very surface view. And if I can lift the veil and understand that it's just like Pari's dreams, Hashem engineered this whole thing just to make it all work for my soul and my journey, to give me this opportunity, it can change everything and it can be so deeply empowering. And this is the reason, this is the whole reason that Hashem made all of this happen through dreams. There are other ways to make it work, but this was a part of Yosef's journey, and Yosef was a dreamer, so Hashem engineered the whole thing just to work in a way that specifically suited Yosef's journey. Our circumstances always are engineered. They're not things that we show up in or we fall into that are difficult. It's the opposite. They were engineered for us. They're not things that we fell into and now we have to choose between either, going with it, especially conforming to pressure, let's say, or I'm just going to have to not conform or not follow the pressure because I have a spiritual obligation to do so. I mean, even if that is the case, and that's not an inaccurate perspective per se, it's still, the responsibility is still to do the right thing. But it's so much less difficult when we reframe it, when we recognize that as almost a cognitive distortion, as a helem, as a concealment, as a extremely incomplete truth, and then we remind ourselves of the full truth that this whole thing is here for me. This whole thing is here for my growth. This whole thing is here for my achievement, for me to strengthen, deepen my connection to Hashem, to bring the infinity of the Creator into the world, to bring the world a step closer to Mashiach. That's all of this whole thing. This person got into their car at that time, and then that music went on at that, and the red light happened exactly this moment. Hashem engineered all of those details. And who knows, maybe that person left the house 5 minutes late and they're running late to work, and Hashem did that too, just to make this work for me. It's very, very different. And that shift in perspective can really, number one, make it a lot less painful. And number two, substantially increase our likelihood of success and really empower us to get through it in a way that we're going to be happy about afterwards, rather than get to the other side of it in a way that we're going to wish we hadn't. And just on that note, fine print is when that happens, and I'm not saying if, I'm saying when that happens, that we show up on the other side of something in a way that we wish we hadn't, there's a very important distinction between acknowledging and recognizing that that wasn't ideal and we'd like to do better next time, versus judging ourselves, being critical of ourselves, being upset at ourselves, none of which increase the chances of us doing a better job next time. Any view towards ourselves that reduces the likelihood of us succeeding next time, which is a fact of the matter is that judgment brings us down, criticism brings us down. All of these things, looking at ourselves negatively, if it reduces our likelihood of doing better next time, that's the evidence that it's the wrong thing. It doesn't mean that we should, when we accept it, when we say that it's important to accept doesn't mean, oh, it's okay, it doesn't matter. No, it matters, but you know what? It happened. Acceptance doesn't mean accept that it's okay and it's fine and it doesn't matter. Accept that it happened, period. Objectively, without any judgment, without any evaluating, just accept that it happened, period. And then we can look at it objectively and say it would be good and I would like to do better next time. And then we can take that further and say, okay, were there any things here that maybe I could have prepared myself differently or set myself up differently or approached it differently? And if I can learn from those lessons for next time, that'll be set me up to do a better job. Amazing, go for it. If we can do that objectively without becoming judgmental and critical of ourselves. But being judgmental and critical of ourselves, it doesn't help anything. So just this reframing, lifting the veil off the world, off the concealment, can really, number one, make things less painful, and number two, drastically increase our odds of, let's call it success, of making it through in the way that we really want to make it through. Just maybe one more thing, that it's really 2 points that we already touched on last week, but in drawing the contrast specifically to Pharaoh's dreams and bringing them together, we can make one additional point. Last week we talked about Yosef's dreams and the fact that there's the trajectory from down to up. We start on the ground, we go up to the sky, and there's work involved. And this week we see the contrast, because Pharaoh's dreams, there's no mention of any work. And what's the trajectory? Dream number 1, cows. Dream number 2, plants. So the trajectory is from something that's more alive to something that's less alive. From something that's more valuable to something that's less valuable. And the message here is that when there isn't work, I actually saw a sign in someone's office once years ago, and it was so simple and it was so brilliant. And it said, if you're riding a bike and it's really easy to pedal, that means you're going downhill. It's like, it's so simple and but incredibly profound at the same time. The fact is, going uphill requires putting in effort. And you know what? Today you can get an electric bike that will take you uphill without any effort, but you know what? When you get to the top of that hill, your heart's not in any better shape than it was before. Your arteries aren't in any better shape than they were before. Your muscles aren't in any better shape than they were before. So you have moved up geographically. You've moved to a higher altitude, but your body hasn't been elevated. If you were pedaling hard and working, you would have strengthened your muscles, strengthened your bones, your tendons, your ligaments. Your heart would be in better shape. Your arteries would be in better shape. So work, by definition, when there is no work, we're going downhill. Pharaoh's dreams have no work, so he's going downhill. Going uphill, by definition, means that we need to put in work. That doesn't mean that all work will take us uphill. As a general rule, I think it's fair to say that there's definitely a correlation between effort and progress and growth. But there isn't an ironclad rule that says if you're putting in effort, you are going upwards, the same way that there's an ironclad rule that says if you're not putting in effort, you're going downwards. Because a person could hypothetically be putting the effort into the wrong things, or, etc., etc. But as a general rule, effort is associated and correlated with growth, and a lack of effort definitely is correlated with a lack of growth, with going downhill. And just, again, it's something to keep in mind when we face those challenges. And, the way that I'm describing it now can make it seem so trivial, but when someone's in that moment, when they're smelling something that reminds them of a moment and they desperately want to eat it, and it's just like, hello, just keep walking, don't eat it, big deal. Well, yeah, technically, but in our experience, it doesn't feel that way. right? These simple little things in the moment for the person for whom this is a thing can be extremely demanding, extremely difficult, extremely uncomfortable. Now, while it's true that the fact that it's difficult doesn't necessarily mean it's good in its growth, but if we know that it's a good thing, that can just be something to remind ourselves, you know what, this is really, really hard. You know what, no one got a gold medal for any physical activity without going through countless hours of burning pain in their muscles, of working hard, of pushing the limits, of doing very difficult things. This is an opportunity for progress, for growth, for achievement, and it makes a lot of sense that it's very difficult. Again, that doesn't take away the difficulty, but if it can make us reframe the difficulty so that we have an appreciation for it, as opposed to just seeing it as an enemy, we now can become the difficulty's partner as opposed to the difficulty's victim, and that also can change everything. So when we understand that Hashem literally engineered this whole thing just to give me this opportunity, and the fact that it's hard makes sense because it's an opportunity for growth, and growth by definition necessarily requires effort and some discomfort. Okay, so this is difficult, and I understand and I appreciate it, and I'm ready. As opposed to, oh, this is so difficult, oh, this is so hard, why did this have to happen to me? That doesn't mean that we can't do the right thing, but the likelihood, is clearly very different. Have a good week.